Hey everyone, Ralph here. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can get started with the Gemini Vision API in Node.js on your local machine with just a few steps. And to show you the end result, here's a demo of what we're going to be building. Once you have this project up and running in just a few minutes, what you'll get is this text-based interface where you can chat with the Gemini API and provide files. So I'm just gonna say yes to if I want to upload files. I'm gonna get a file picker here. Let's take a PNG. I'll show you a video in a few seconds, and then we can just say, can you describe this? And what the code does is just turns the image into base64 string, sends that off to the Gemini API together with the MIME type. Both of those are required by the Gemini API, and then we'll get our response back in the terminal here in a few minutes. So this is the description and it is correct. Let's also show you how it works a bit with videos. So do I have another question? Yes, I do. Do I want to upload a file? Definitely. So I just have this example video in the repo. You can use any video that you want, of course, maximum, I think 10 megabytes. What's your question? What's this video about? Again, the script that I have right here, which is just one Node.js file that I'll walk through in this tutorial and explain how it works, just generates a base64 string of this video, appends the MIME type that the Gemini API expects to get in order for it to process these, and sends that off to the Gemini API, waits for the response, and then shows it to the user. And this is just a simple example to get you started with the Gemini API so you can go ahead and build something more complex and sort of build on this. Videos usually takes a little bit longer, but we'll see the response here any second where Gemini has looked at this video and provide us with a description. And here you can see it got the name of what I'm talking about in the video wrong, but otherwise it's fairly correct. Gemini does hallucinate a little bit, but this is, I think, a good starting point. So watch the rest of the tutorial to learn how you can get this set up in just a few minutes. Let's go. Before we get started, I just want to mention that the GitHub repo we'll be using here today is available in a link in the video description. It also has a README with the step-by-step instructions that we're going to be going through here today, and I'll try to improve it over the next few days based on any feedback that I get to make it as useful as possible. In the next few minutes, the things that I'm going to do is that I'm going to clone this repo. I'm going to set up a Google Cloud project and configure that to use Gemini. And then I'll install everything on my local machine and just show you the project in action. And then lastly, I'm going to walk you through the code and explain what the code does in case you want to tweak it. If anything of that doesn't sound like something that's interesting to you, there are chapters in this video, so jump forward or skip ahead to whatever makes most sense to you. But where we'll start is just to clone this repo. So let's go ahead and copy it, and then we'll just do git clone and paste the link here. It's not a very big repo, so it should be fairly quick. And then we can just navigate into that so we have that available to us later. I'm also just going to go ahead and open this folder in my code editor. So I have it available because we will be changing one thing in the index.js here momentarily. It's the only JavaScript file that we have, but we want to change the project ID here in a few minutes once we have that available to us. Okay, now we've cloned the repo. What's next is to set up our Google Cloud project. Now, this tutorial sort of expects you to have a Google Cloud account set up, and a valid payment method on file is required for you to run the Gemini APIs. So if you don't have that already, go and set that up and come back. And what we're going to do next is to go to the Google Cloud console. So I got a link right here. Let's go ahead and open that. And this might look slightly different depending on if you have no projects or you already have projects. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and click here. We're going to create a new project. We're going to name it, and let's call this Ralph's Gemini tutorial. And don't have to select an organization, and then we just go ahead and click create. This is going to take a few seconds here while this is being created. We can see these little spinners, so let's just wait for those to be completed. And once it has, sometimes the project gets auto-selected, sometimes it doesn't. So let's click on this right here, and we can see this changed to Ralph's Gemini tutorial. Great, because we want to be in the new project that we created. Next, what we want to remember to do is to copy the project ID that we have here. Just hit the copy icon, open up our editor, and let's replace this project ID with this ID and hit save. Next, if you're new to Google Cloud projects, what we have now is just an empty project shell. There's nothing in it. What we want to do is to associate APIs with it. So when you're using this project, you have access to various APIs. In our case, we want to use the Gemini one, right? So the way to do that is when you have your project selected here, you just scroll down and go to Quick Access, API and Services. You click that, and then you should see this Enable APIs and Services. So let's click on that. And there's currently 445 APIs available, and we want to find the one that we want. If you're searching for Gemini, you're not going to find it. It's because Gemini is part of the Vertex AI API. So search for Vertex, and you should find something that looks like this. And then you just click this. And the last step here is to click this enable button to make sure that we enable the Vertex AI API on the project that we're currently in. And again, the Gemini APIs or Gemini models are part of the Vertex here. And sometimes you might have to configure your billing here, but otherwise you should be getting to this screen, and that just means that the Vertex AI API is now enabled in your Google Cloud project. Great. Now we can close this tab right here. And the next step is to set up the Google Cloud CLI and credentials on your local machine. So if that's something that you've never done as well, I got some instructions here. Just go to this Google Cloud CLI docs link, and then this is going to take you to a page that explains what the Google Cloud CLI is, if you want to read about that. But I'm just going to scroll down to this download and install the Google Cloud CLI. And here you got installation instructions that are actually pretty good. So you're just going to have to find which operative system you have. So I have Mac OS. You're going to download whichever the version for whichever version that you have. It's for Intel, M-based processors, etc. And then just follow the installation instructions there. I have already installed this on my computer, so I'm not going to do it again, but it's pretty straightforward. You just do the follow these commands and you're going to have it installed. Now, once you've done that, the next thing that you want to do is that you want to initialize this. So I'm going to do this on my computer as well. So I'm just going to copy this right here. Going to head over to the window in which I had, where I installed this original a few days ago. And then I'm just going to paste this. And if this is your first time running this, it's going to look slightly different because I've already used it. You're probably going to have to log in and just authorize yourself before you can choose a project. I've used it, so I'm just going to go ahead and reinitialize. And I'm going to be asked to say which user is it. So I'm going to select the user here. And then lastly, it's going to show me a bunch of projects that I have available, and you should probably see your recently created project. And then you just got to go ahead and choose which one it is. And I think it is number 4 that I just created. Awesome. Let's double check in code that it is. Yes, it is, because I've been trying to re-record this a couple of times. Once you've done that, you should see this little message here. Your Google Cloud SDK is configured and ready to use. Awesome. Now you don't need this window anymore. And now we're actually ready. We've completed all of the Google Cloud settings and configurations and all of that. Now we're actually ready to go ahead and try to use our project. So let's do that next. And what we're going to do is head over to the project folder that we just created. We can see we have a couple of files in here, but what we want to start with is just to run yarn install to download and install all of the dependencies that we need. So let's do that. And once we've done that, we're actually ready to run this. So we're going to run node in index.js, and we can just go ahead and move this over right here. It's the only file that we have in this project, and it's pretty straightforward. So let's run that, and it's a text-based chatbot, very simple, just to show you the APIs. So you're going to be asked, do you want to upload a file with your question? Yes, I think that that's the purpose of this tutorial. So let's hit yes here. It's going to open up a Finder window. If you're on a Windows-based machine, this won't work. I had some difficulties with the Node package that uses that, but I provided some instructions of how you can get around this in the code file, so check that. I got a couple of example files here. You can use anything on your machine. You don't have to use the ones, but I provided a couple just in case you want to try. So I'm just going to grab this example.png. And then once we've selected a file, it's going to ask, what's your question? Can you describe this? And it's just a helmet. So let's see what it says. And I found that the API can sometimes be fast and sometimes be slow. This is a fairly simple image and a fairly simple question, but it still took a few minutes. We get a response. I'm not going to read it, but it sounds correct. It is it's a helmet, and it describes the name correctly, etc. So this is just an example. You can use any file as I showed you in the demo earlier. Let's actually jump into the code and explain what's happening behind the scenes. So in the index.js right here, let's go ahead and, well, that's maybe too much. Let's do this. At the very top here, we're just requiring our dependencies. And again, I had difficulties with using the node file dialog one on my computer. So I'm using a macOS open file dialog, which means that Windows users, this won't work. Got some suggestions down below of how you can work around that. And then we got FS, we have a read line, which is enabling us to have this back and forth in the terminal. And then here is the importing the Vertex AI that enables us to communicate with the Gemini API. Then at the very top here, I got a couple of configurations that you can change. I'm using US Central 1. There's a link in the GitHub repo that gives you access to some documentation around what other options that you have. So you can use something that works. Then we have the project ID that you should have set to the project that you're currently working on. And then we're using the Gemini Pro Vision. If you want to upload videos, if you want to upload images, you got to use the Vision one. If you're just going to do text-based things, you can just use Gemini Pro. Then we have a couple of simple functions that we set. So the Gemini API expects to get a base 64 version of any image or video. So we just have a little function that will allow us to convert our files to base 64. Then when it comes to selecting a file on your computer so that you don't accidentally select a TXT or an HTML or something else, I just set up a set of allowed files that the user can select in the file picker. If you want to prevent any of these, you can just remove them. It's just all of the ones that are available or supported by Gemini. And to speaking about what's supported by Gemini, here they are. So these are the various types of files or types of files that you can upload. And this essentially is just converting. This function converts the input file extension and provides a MIME type that you got to pass to the API, which I'll show you in a bit. So this function essentially just grabs the correct MIME type for the file that the user, or the file type that the user has selected. So we have that to make the script a little bit more dynamic. And then this bit right here is just a little function that manages the back and forth with asking, getting the user to provide a question. Then here we have the Gemini API. I should have commented this better here, but this is the function that calls the Gemini API. And we're going to pass in our project ID, a project location, which model, the input file path. So that's the file path to the video or image that you want to pass along with the user prompt, which is the user question, essentially, the prompt that we put right here. And in this function, which we'll call in a different function, but I'll just walk it through right here, is we set up a Vertex AI function here where we pass in the project ID and the project location that we've defined up top. And then we just set up a get generative model, and we're passing in the model, which is the Gemini Vision API in our case. And then we're going to start constructing some of the input parameters that we want to pass on. The API expects us to, we can actually look at that first. This is what the request looks like, and you're sending in the role of the user, and then you're going to provide what Google called parts, and you can have several parts. You can just send in a text part, which is just a prompt saying what's the capital of Stockholm, sorry, Sweden, it's Stockholm. And you can also pass in parts which can be one or several files. I have a pretty simplistic setup here, so what I'm doing is just constructing the request with the user question only, assuming that you, when you do this, selected that you don't want to provide a file, and just take the user prompt or the user question here and set that as this request part that is being passed in here. And what I do next is here is just to check if the user has provided an input file path, so they have selected a file. Let's add a couple of things to the request part here. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take the input file path and create our base64 file. Again, the Gemini API expects to get any files as base64. So we just convert the file to a base64 string that we can pass on in the API. And then it also needs a MIME type, so we're just calling that function that we had previously again, passing in the input file path, and we just get the MIME type generated for it dynamically. And then we create this little file part const here that has this structure here. We're just using an inline data prop here, and then we're setting the data and the MIME type that are parameters that we need to pass in as base64 file and MIME type that we defined here, and then just pushing that into our request part here, which means that this bit right here, which is the request, sort of handles the existence of only a user prompt or a user prompt and a file dynamically. So this bit right here works with or without a file. And then we're just going to go ahead and use an await generative vision model dot generate content stream here, which is sending the request over to the Gemini API. And then we're just going to sit and wait for the response to that. And once we have the response, this function is just going to return the text response. So in our case, it returned this right here. And that's really the Gemini API bit. It's not more complicated than that if you just want to upload a file, a video, or an image. And then let me just walk you through the rest of the bit here. So that's the Gemini bit. Now the rest of the code file here sits in this function called main. That is just the orchestrator of what you're seeing here, essentially. So what we're doing here is that we're just setting a placeholder variable. We're setting a variable to keep running, which means that this is going to keep looping. So if you see, if I want to ask another question, I can do that. I get asked again, do I want to upload a function? So let's try say no. What's your question? What's the capital of Sweden, as an example? And this is just going to keep running until the user quits, essentially. And then we get asked, do you want to upload a file with your question as I showed? You can say yes or no. Set the input file path as null, so it is set. And then here we have this file selection functionality. Again, this only works on Mac OS because I have some problems with my local machine with running the node file dialog. What we're doing here is just selecting the file and then storing the file path to that file here. If you're on Windows and you just want to try the Gemini API, I suggest that you just comment this and then hard code something here just to play around a little bit, and then you can start using for instance node file dialog and just replace this with something that works for you. Then lastly, we're just asking the user the question using the function that we defined further up, and then we're passing in we're calling the call Gemini API function that we walked through a minute ago, passing in all of these parameters. And then we have some additional logic down here, just asking, do you have another question? And checking if the user says yes, we're just gonna keep running essentially, and we're gonna loop this over. And if the user says no, we're just gonna say, okay, have a great rest of your day, and close the readline functionality. Okay, there you have it. That's how you can get started with the Gemini Vision API in Node.js locally on your machine. I hope this was helpful. It's really meant to be a starting point for you to get something that works, that you can start iterate on and build something different with it. If it was useful, please consider giving this video a thumbs up, and also check out my channel. I got a lot of other tutorials, and I will be adding additional Gemini API tutorials in the next week or so. So make sure to subscribe if you're interested in these kind of videos. But for today, thank you so much for watching, and maybe I will see you in a future video. Bye.